Good evening, everyone. Shavua Tov. It is so lovely to see you all, and there's so many people here. It's delightful to see. But I want to say a special welcome to a very, very dear friend, loyal friend, Mr. Michael Davis, who is. We sat 10 feet apart for about 30 years, and. Let us just say, if he were a wine, he would be a very precious vintage. It's also, he's been holding out. He tells me this is the first Malava Malka since 1940. Wow. He was just waiting for a good one. It's all right. And Baruch Hashem, he found a good one. In addition, of course, as always, to thanking the Magic House of Torah, Sharon, we have so many people. This is really the loveliest just expression. I don't think anyone organized it, anyone asked anybody for anything. It was just the loveliest outpouring of the various wonderful goodies which we've enjoyed. I'm not going to say who brought what, but I will thank Senta and Fanny and Cyril and Buddy and Sonia and Rena and Sharon list, and Stephen, Steve brought us to a new level. He brought wine.
And it's good.
It is good. I've already had 9 cups, and so I do not take any responsibility for the shear. I don't know how the shear is going to be, but I'm having a great time.
Have some more.
I'd like to thank Mark and Mindy for their wonderful contribution, and for those of you who are going healthy, thanks again.
And Sarah and Buddy?
Did I said Sarah?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I've been there, done that. Okay. And as delightful an occasion as this is, I have to tell you that this was among the saddest of the shiurim that I've prepared up to this moment. The story of the Pilegesh B'Givah. And one of the moments of illumination when I prepare the source sheets, and either I remember or Rena, who graciously processes them, reminds me and then takes over for me, we try not to put God's name on the source sheets so that there's less of a problem of disposing of them afterwards for those of you who choose not to keep them. And in this particular chapter, which is the epicenter of the tragic story that we'll be discussing tonight, I'm scanning and I'm looking, and the Shem Hashem appears only once. And it appears in a tangential reference to a location. The character says he's on his way to the Beis Hashem, to the house of God, which means that we are in an atmosphere almost without the oxygen of the divine presence. It's almost like a laboratory experiment of what happens to the Jewish people, what happens to relationships and to the community at large when God is not a factor, and he's simply a name that is attached to places or to buildings. And human nature begins to take over. And the behaviors that come about. It is the story of the Pilegesh B'Givah. There were people actually, when I announced that I would be teaching it this evening, there were really people who questioned whether it was a good choice of a text for a public discourse. And the truth is, I have subsequently satisfied myself by the discovery of a Gemara on the 6th page of Gittin. I'm not taking a call, folks. I happen to have taken a shot of the Gemara on my phone rather than lug another book. So that is why I'm opening my phone. And the Gemara there says, oh gosh, I wish I brought my glasses. Rabbi Yosar Omar, so the Gemara there introduces Vatizna Allah Pilagsho. You'll see there is a strange phrase which will be at the beginning, which sets off the whole crazy chain of events. And there were two rabbis who argued what it was that actually came into the relationship between this anonymous Fanny Pilegesh and her husband, who by the way is also anonymous, except we know he's a Levi. What happened that suddenly they were parted? And Rabbi Yosser gives one reason, and another reason is offered by Rabbi Yonason. The Ashkechei Rabbi Yosser le'Eliyahu. Rabbi Yosser, who was clearly a person of great sanctity, encountered the prophet Elijah. And the Navi, Eliyahu Navi, appears at various points in rabbinic literature to various people, and he always offers what we might call the sublime perspective. In other words, things are not as they appear to us, rather from the divine point of view. And so he says this, so Rabbi Yosser says to him, Amalei mai ko'ovid HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What is God doing? And he answered him, Omar le osik Pilegesh B'Givah. That God is studying this passage of the concubine of Givah. Umay Omar. So he says, so Rabbi Yosser, if you notice, he's a combatant, right? He has a very strong opinion, a tradition about what the story's trigger really was. So he says to him, Sonu, what is God saying about Pilegesh B'Givah? He says, Omar le ev Yosar b'ni kachu omer, Yonason b'ni kachu omer. He quotes both opinions. My son Ev Yosar says so-and-so. My son Yonason, Rabbi Yonason says so-and-so. Omar le, Rabbi Yosar says to him, Chas v'sholem u'mi'iko sveiko kamishmayu. You're telling me that even God is in doubt as to which is the correct interpretation? Omar le, elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chai. It's a very provocative Gemara. He says, because God sees truth in each. Both are the words of the living God. In other words, each tradition has its foundation. But what is interesting is the Gemara which follows this. And he tells us, Omar Rav Chisto, le'olam al yatil odom emo yisera b'soch beiso. A person should be very careful not to terrify the members of his household. In other words, not to guide his household with a heavy or an angry hand, with temper. Why? Shahari Pilegesh B'Givah hitel alea bala emo yisera. The reason why the Pilegesh B'Givah incident occurred is because her husband terrorized her. Hipila kama rivavos me Yisrael. And as a result of his anger in the household, tens of thousands of Jews died. So that is going to be important for us. So the reason I read this Gemara is for two reasons. First of all, to tell you that this is obviously an especially important chapter into which to delve, because Eliyahu Navi tells us that God himself considers this particular story to be a priority for study. Ribono Shel Olam himself is studying Pilegesh B'Givah. Secondly, this gives us entree into reading the incident with which the story begins, and an incident which at first blush and in the kind of ad hoc translation offered here by the 1917 JPS no longer under copyright, and now you know why, translation, misleads. So ready to hand some of these out? I have mine. Here are some more. Sonia, would you be kind enough? Thank you. Just send them around. This will give you something. Now, before we begin, to help those who perhaps were not with us last Sunday morning to orient themselves, this story, which is the 19th chapter in the book of Shoftim, in the book of Judges, this story actually picks up in the wake of the story that we discussed last week. Last week we discussed the concept, or Sunday morning, I said, yeah, last week, we discussed Pesel Micha. We discussed the idolatrous sanctuary established by this fellow Micha, which was appropriated by the tribe of Dan. They just moved in and stole his whole shul. They basically took the whole shul and walked it off to the tribe of Dan, which is, imagine reporting this to the police in ancient times. Is this 911? Yes, what's your emergency? A tribe just came and stole my synagogue. Were they Cherokee, Iroquois? No, the tribe of Dan. Was that Dan the mechanic? I know a guy named... Anyway, so they just stole it, but it became an important idolatrous alternative. And all of a sudden we pick up with another story which begins in a domestic problem. Vayihi bayamim hahem umelech ein b'Yisrael. This, of course, is a very important theme in the book of Judges. The fact that there is no king. And no king means that there is no central personality who creates the society's structure and its value system and laws. It's a kind of an anarchy. Everything's all over the place. Umelech ein b'Yisrael, vayihi ish Levi, and there is a certain individual who is a Levite. Now, in these stories, in the last two stories, and this is one of the themes which is sort of encourages you to read them side by side, but aside from that, Levim are very convenient characters. Why? Because Levim, by their designation, were meant to be scattered among the tribes of Israel and to function as teachers. So they tend to be people without land. They also tend to be people who are not living in the middle of their clan. And anyone who has had experience in the Middle East knows that even to this day, Arab societies are very much grouped in clans, and it's one of the really important political realities that in order, if you're working, for example, in the police system in Israel, you have to understand the relationships between these clans. They're not like our gangs, which exist for criminal purposes, and yet there's a very intense web of loyalty. And so, someone from one clan is misused a girl from another clan. All sorts of complicated webs of revenge and grudges are initiated. You really have to understand that in order to work effectively in such a community. But a Levi is a kind of a particle and moves around without his entire clan around him. That makes him a bit vulnerable, as you'll see in this story. Vayish Levi, and he was gar b'Yarkesei Har Ephraim. He was living in the region, the far side of the mountain of Ephraim. Vayikach lo isha Pilegesh, and he takes not a wife exactly, but a concubine. Now, concubine status is very tricky because there is still raging debate among the Rishonim whether a concubine whether she has the status of an eshes ish, of a full wife, vis-a-vis things like adultery and ketubah and other things. So the question, the fact that she's a Pilegesh blurs some of the categories around this particular incident. And a Pilegesh is a concubine where, more or less, it is not a mistress, because it's an arrangement where there is an intimate relationship between a man and a particular woman. She is individual to him, but she doesn't enjoy quite the rights of a full wife.
No pseudo.
There may not be. In other words, the Rishonim are not even clear what Pilegesh was. Just for your interest, for the subject of, if we do our next Racy, Rav Yaakov Emden in modern times caused quite a stir by suggesting that this category be revived in order to relieve some of the tensions of yeshiva bachrim. I mean, he was quite serious. He was one of the first modern poskim to realize that with the advancing age of marriage and with the extension of the period of education, that there were really great tensions and difficulties in community. And of course, everybody, well, not everybody, but there was great opposition. This plan never was, to the best of my knowledge, no one acted upon it, but it's a fascinating tshuva. And he's not you're not talking about a kooky, you're talking about a very serious person who was at least recognizing a very serious problem in modern culture. And I could give you a whole discourse about how various Orthodox communities are responding to issues surrounding sexuality in the modern context. It's really very interesting. In any case, Vatizna alav Pilagsha. Now, you will see in that 1917, no longer copyrighted and we know why, translation, a rather superficial, it says, and his concubine played harlot against him, which would make it sound like she was whatever adultery means with a Pilegesh. However, both the Mefarshim, the traditional Mefarshim, and the Bible scholars, because I checked on the Anchor Bible as well, based upon the Septuagint, say that this does not mean that she was unfaithful. What it means is she wandered from him or went away from him. And that fits very closely with the Gemara we just cited from Gittin, that apparently this guy was impossible to live with. And one of the rabbis say that he found a fly in his soup. Another one says he found a hair in his soup. There are various interpretations. However, what the sense you get is that this woman was living in an abusive relationship. Right? And as such, and you'll see, because she's not running to look for another suitor. Vatelech me'ito el beis avia. She simply goes back to her father's house, which would indicate that this affair was, when I say affair, this whole story was triggered by one brutal man. That seems to be the story. And she goes home to her father's house. So in a moment we're going to deal with, I want to go further with you in the story, and I would like to pause for just a moment and note something. First, as we said last week, the last two stories in the book of Judges, according to both the classical Mefarshim and also according to literary critics of the Bible, is thematically connected to the first chapter of Judges, and indeed is said to have happened at the very earliest period. So then, so what? So I'll ask you a wonderful question. So then why is it at the end? And the answer must be that in this story, and perhaps with these last two stories, the story of Pesel Micha and Pilegesh B'Givah, we have the coda of the message of the whole period of Judges. Its core issue. Right? And the core issue presented, if you will, in its most blatant form. Because we've had various characters who have been dealing with the external problems of the Jewish people. Right? Most of the book of Judges is about what we mentioned. Either it's about, in the beginning, the failure of the tribes to finish the conquest, or their misbehavior, which brings about persecution from any one of a number of their neighbors, and how they repent, and some great figure comes along. These last two stories, there is no more real interaction with the outside world. These two stories are about the internal issues, the issues that fundamentally distance the Jews from God, of which all of the other sufferings are simply factors. In other words, they come about because of these things. And so if you want to go to the heart of the matter, those are the things that are highlighted at the end. And indeed, as we open Pilegesh B'Givah, and we just said, you're not going, with the exception of that one throwaway line, you're not going to see the name of God mentioned in this chapter at all. The next chapter will be a little different, even though you don't have it printed. The whole Pilegesh B'Givah is a human drama. It's with that world sealed by its sky. They're not thinking about anything above. It's this sealed world. And all of the tempest and all of the degradation is of that world. It's contained in our world. And you will see toward the end, sort of moving to the end of this paragraph, of this passage, that there is going to be an extraordinary, violent reaction on the part of the tribes of Israel against their perceived outrage in the story of the Pilegesh B'Givah. And what the Gemara in Sanhedrin is going to say is, God is watching all of this. And God is going to say, where was all of your fury when I was being denigrated with the whole story of the Pesel Micha? Pesel Micha, everyone was fine. You know, everyone is moichel for God. This is one of my favorite, like, sort of standard Jewish lines. This is as New York Jewish as a bagel. The people who will say to you, don't worry, sweetie, God will forgive you for that. Who talks to you? Everyone is to be moichel for the Ribono Shel Olam's kavod. Everyone is it's really easy. It's all right, it's for your health. Meaning, fly to Miami on Shabbos, what the difference? It's for your health. And everything is okay for your health. Because we're very easy about God's honor. And so one of the things going on here is that this self-righteous, towering rage that is going to engulf the whole Jewish people as a result of Pilegesh B'Givah stands in terrible contrast to the absolute lack of reaction to the Pesel Michon. The language of the Gemara there is Bichvodi lo mechisem shel kvodo shel basar v'dam mechisem. When my honor was at stake, you made no protest, but when it was a matter of flesh and blood, then you got excited. So part of what Pilegesh B'Givah is going to be, it's going to be not only a function of what happens to a human society, but it is what happens to a human society which has lost its sensitivity to what God wants us to do in this world. And so, even though you could, if you could bind this passage in social contract theory and consider it a dynamic of human community, human society, Sefer Shoftim is not really what that's about. Sefer Shoftim wants you to have this business as usual reaction to Pesel Micha in the back of your mind, functioning quietly in your computer brain as you read what happens with the Pilegesh. So let's tell you the dirty little story. Okay? It's more somebody, I think Steve asked me, is it a racy story or something? The truth of the matter is, it's just so sad. It's just a sad story. So it begins, as I said, with this incident of what appears to be a reaction of brutality. And she goes off to her father's house. Vatihi sham yomim arba chodoshim. She runs away from her brood of a husband. 4 months go by. He just leaves her there for 4 months. And finally, after 4 months of doing nothing, he picks himself up and he follows after her in an effort to talk her into coming home. And he brings along a servant, he brings along his team of donkeys. And very interesting, we never hear about the girl's reaction. Who was excited to see him? Take a look at Pasuk Dalet. Vayechzak bo chosno avianaro. Vayeshev ito shloshes yamim. Yochlu vayishtu vayalinu sham. The father-in-law, he is thrilled, because you can imagine this girl comes back home. She's probably moping around all the time. She's already been somebody's Pilegesh. She's not exactly desirable on the matchmaking market. So the father-in-law and the husband, they're making up. He doesn't say one word to the woman. Not one word. Talk about anonymous. And the father-in-law wines him and dines him. And Brent is looking for something there that I might have missed, okay?
She brings him into her father's house. He's already made contact with her. She takes him to her father's house.
Yeah. It doesn't say that she's happy. What's she going to do?
No, she doesn't say that she's happy.
No,
she doesn't go away.
The father sees her by Yismach Likroso, and he's happy to greet her. Okay, so she could
She
have
didn't
said,
send him away.
okay,
And the
Fair
father-in-law
point.
didn't want her.
fair point, but the only one really excited here is the father.
Yes.
Right? The father keeps him, and the father will let him go. The father is one of these, every morning they get up, let's have breakfast. After hotel breakfast, you obviously need a nap. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think there was a Menashe Skolnick routine about being in the hotel. He has a whole song about getting up in the morning and going to breakfast, and then it's time for a snack, and then you come to lunch, and by the end of the day you can't move. I think I'll go play tennis. No, maybe I'll just take another nap. So this is the process that continues here. Finally, I skip some psukim. He doesn't want to be there anymore. And they come, and here's one of the great ironies in the story. In Pasuk Yud, if you see it, you can also check it on verse 10 at the bottom. Heim im yevus v'hayom rad me'od. They were passing by the city of the Jebusite city. Now, by the way, this is parenthetically relevant to the opening theme of Judges, because this was land that technically should have been conquered. And the Benjaminite side of Jerusalem was not really conquered. So the Jebusites are still living there and will live there until King David completes the conquest along with Yoav. And his servant says, you know, it's really late in the day, it's going to be dark soon. Let's stop here in the Jebusite city. Vayomer Elov Adonov lo nosur el ir nochri asher lo mi b'nei Yisrael hinu. I don't want to go to a city with non-Jews. They won't receive me nicely. Let's push a little further and let's go to a Jewish city. Now notice something that's going on here. The Levi in this story has come to assume that there will be loyalty among all of the members of all of the tribes, and that they will treat him like a kinsman when he arrives. He comes to this, he ends up, so they move on. Vayasur Shom lavo lalun b'Givah, vayavo vayeshev berchov ha'ir. They came to the Benjaminite city of Giv'ah. Now, this Giv'ah is going to be interesting even later in Jewish history, because eventually it's going to be rebuilt. And Professor Albright, of blessed memory, excavated and wrote about this in the 30s, that this became King Saul's sort of base city, but only later. You'll see it in our story, it will eventually be destroyed, but then later rebuilt by Israel's first king. So what happens? Yes?
What's with Ramah here? Because that's where Shmuel is from. It says just before, at the end of this, V'lanu b'Givah over Ramah. Yeah, were they that close? Suppose at the end of the second paragraph.
Yeah. Ramah sometimes means elevated.
Maybe not a specific city.
Right. I'm not sure. You got me on that. So they came there. Well, what happens? They go to sin. Vayeshev berchov ha'ir. He puts himself in the street, which was the equivalent of sitting in the back of the synagogue where the guests would sit. Mr. Steinberg told me that even as, when he was growing up in Hungary, that his father regularly on Friday night, if there were any people in the back of the shul, that's where a person didn't have a place to stay or didn't have a place to eat, his father would regularly bring home orchim from the last bench in the shul. Davis is nodding knowingly. So he's sitting there. The ein ish ma'asef osam habayta lo, and no one takes them home. If this were a movie, this is where the creepy music would start to play, because we have just deviated from the expectation. This is not the way this is supposed to go. So you're hearing a little bit of he's in the street. Hinei ish zakein, one old guy ba min ma'aseu min asadeh ba'erev ish mehar Ephraim. He's also a stranger. He's not a Benjaminite, he's from Har Ephraim. And he happens to be sojourning in Givah, where the locals are Benjaminites. Verse 17. He sees this fellow, this visitor, this guest, and he's sitting in the marketplace or in the street in the city. And he says to him, where are you going? Where are you from? And here is where the only Shem Hashem is going to come up. He says to him, we are going from Beit Lechem, Yehuda, to the far side of Har Ephraim, and that's where I'm from. And then we are going until Beit Lechem, Yehuda. There's Beis Hashem ani holech, ve'ein ish ma'asef osi habayta. As if to emphasize that I'm a regular stand-up guy. I'm going to stop at the Beis Hashem, and no one is taking me home. So of course he's being welcomed by another guest. So it reminds me, one time I was spending the summer in Paris. The summer I turned 19. So I was taking courses at the Sorbonne, and I was staying in a neighborhood right near the Bois de Boulogne, the famous woods of Boulogne, and there was a shul there. And I'm all by myself. I went to the shul, and I thought for sure somebody would talk to me, something. This guy walks in. This guy, I don't know, he's a nice Jewish person. So this guy walks in. He was like a caricature. He walked in like, he was quite wide, with rings on all his fingers. He's sort of like a character out of Charles Dickens. Dickens has a passage where one of his characters lives in a house with all of this gilt furniture. And he records them. The furniture seems to be saying, "Wouldn't you love to melt me down?" So this guy looked like someone you'd want to melt down. And he comes in, and around him are a bunch of kids, his family. So I'm sitting there all alone. Finish the davening. Everyone's sort of standing around. Nothing happens. So I went up to a couple of these guys. I said, "Would you like to be my guests for lunch?" The father hears this and he starts to laugh. "You're going to invite us for lunch? Ha 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 ha." I said, "You could come to us." And by this time I had no taste for it. So I went home and sang all the smears that I knew by myself. But my feeling was, if no one else is going to invite anybody, even though I was all alone, a kid in Paris, so I'll invite. I always made extra food even then. The point here is, this fellow who himself is the stranger is the only one there who offers any hospitality to this Levi who is bringing his little entourage, bringing his wife home. Well, I guess you know what happens next. He takes him, they have a very polite negotiation. He says, "Look, I'm not looking for anything. I have my own food. I have food from my animals. I just need a place to stay." So he says, "You can come on the condition, no more of this about supplying your own food. You'll be my guest." Up to this point, in this micro dialogue, we have a typical scene of proper Middle Eastern hospitality. As you would experience probably from any Bedouin family that brought you in, and once you're a guest, you're treated royally. However, once he gets in the house, verse 22, Heimo mitivim es libom, and they are gladdening their hearts. In other words, they're having a good old time. Hine anshe ha'ir anshe b'nei b'liyal, Sabu es habayis. a group of people from the town of low morals. Now, this is going to be a little important. When we have this story, there is another story behind this, of course.
Well, in Vayera, this is stone.
This,
It's the same words, Nasabu Alavai.
exactly. This is meant to trigger in your mind the story of the angels who visit Lot in Sodom. The old stranger, who himself is not a resident, right? Same position as Lot, is playing the part of Lot. And the people of the town seem to be doing the same. Except you will notice that there will be some very important small differences, if you recall the details there. And they, first of all, one of the phrases that is important in the description of this, of the scene in Vayera, is the fact that this was participated in by an entire community. And these distinctions, I'm not making this up, are largely the result of the reading offered us by the Ramban. Now the Ramban, we don't have a Perush, a commentary by the Ramban on Sefer Shoftim. However, the Ramban on Chumash, in the story of Lot, takes a detour and offers an extended essay on the story of Pilegesh B'Givah and how to understand it. At any rate, one of the things which is to be pointed out is that in the story of Sodom, the Torah says, the Anshe Ha'ir Anshe Sodom Nosabu al Habayis, is picked up because we have a good Baal Koreh, actually two excellent Baal Kriya in our midst. But there it says, Minar v'ad Zaken. And the group that attacked the angels in Lot's house was a group from young to old, Kol Ha'am Mikotzet, the entire community, more or less. So why is this important? This is important because the Ramban tells us that in Sodom, the reason that this gruesome custom existed, namely that anybody caught in town after dark was thrown to the wolves, so to speak, that people could visit upon them their most horrible sexual predatory instincts. It was something which was done strategically. It was done because the people of Sodom hated strangers. They hated strangers and they hated charity. And Hachnasas Orchim, welcoming a needy stranger, a needy guest, was considered to be one of the most important characters of charity. And so in Sodom, the illicit rape of strangers was a bit like it is in certain warfares around the world, something which was specifically designed to terrorize. And that's why it enjoyed the support of the whole community. Minar v'ad Zaken, the Zkanim, the elders, are the ones who are supposed to be enforcing the rules in the community. So in Sodom, this was a matter of malice aforethought. When we get to the story of the Pilegesh B'Givah, it's not Minar v'ad Zaken. It's these particular B'nai Belial. It's the lowest element, a group of bums. And their motivation, the way the Ramban reads it, their motivation is that they are crazed with they're crazed with lust. And one of the ways we will be able to see that in Pilegesh B'Givah is that for all of their ferocity, they seem to be open to negotiation, right? They're in Sodom, they want what they want, and they actually threaten Lot that they will do something worse to him for preventing them from doing what they're going to do. Why? According to the Ramban's reading, it's a very clever reading, because they are maintaining the character of Sodom. This is just as you would punish a thief, you would punish a murderer in Sodom, as in certain current political ideologies. Being poor was a criminal act. To be poor, to be vulnerable, the assumption was you're a threat to society. You get in the way. You drain our resources. So in Sodom, this was a legislated response. In Givah, this was some bums who, true, were... None of them was a candidate for Mafter Yonah, nor is what they did excusable, but it's a whole different parsha. However, you are intended to react, because what happens first, you see, you are made complicit in the response that will follow this act. So what happens? And the details here are important. Let's read them together. Their demand is Hotzeas Ha'ish Asher Bo El Beischo V'Nedo'en. Nedo'en, send out the man. So the first demand is for a victim for homosexual rape. Vayetze aleim ha'ish bal habayis, maybe the only good guy in the story, the guy who is playing the Lot part. Vayomer aleim, and he said to them, Al achai al toreuno achre asher bo ha'ish hazeh el beisi al ta'asu es hanivolo hazos. Please, this guy is already in my house. Do not do this abominable thing. Interesting, he doesn't say he's a guest in our town. He says he's in my house. And they respond, and he makes a counter-offer. The same kind of counter-offer, if you recall, that Lot made, which was rejected. He said, Hine biti abasula ufilag shehu. We'll send out, just as Lot offered 2 daughters, he offers 1 daughter and a Pilegesh, this poor girl, like she hadn't been through enough. And notice she's offered by the stranger, because it seems to have been a consensus that nothing they could do to the Pilegesh or the unmarried woman would be on a level of atrocity of what they would do to the man himself. And he says, then you can satisfy yourselves, do whatever you want, and don't bother this man. They didn't want to respond to this negotiation. The guest takes things in hand. He takes his Pilegesh, who he's just spent a week in the father's house making all kind of promises. He's going to take care of it. It's going to be wonderful. We're going to be happy. There's 2 little birds in the nest. And he says, here. He throws her out like a bone to dogs. And why is this going to be so important? Why are these gruesome details so important? Because we're going to be, see, we are in a sense, and the literary devices here are wonderful, we are in a sense eyewitnesses. We are witnessing this through the lens of the narrator who is telling us exactly what happened. But in this case, what happened is not going to be the story. What is going to be important is what he is going to publish as the story at the end of this chapter. What he is going to say happened in this instance. A few more details, and then we'll get to the crunch toward the end. He throws her out, and they're satisfied. וידעו עושו ויסעללו בו כל הלילה עד הבוקר וישלחו בעלוס השחר, כעלוס השחר. And essentially, they repeatedly outraged her for the rest of the night until the sun came up. Okay, what here did not happen? Did they kill her? At this point, no. Did they move on the man as they had originally asked? No. Did he make any attempt to intervene?
No.
Does he go looking for her? You'll see in the next pasuk or two. Does he express any concern that this is going on? And if you read carefully, "Vatavo ha'isha lifnos haboker vatipo pesach beis ha'ish asher Adonai Hashem ad ha'or." She collapsed on the doorway until light. The house where her husband was staying. Who opened the door for her? Who was waiting up for her? We don't even have Tom Bodette leaving a light on. Nobody. They dumped her at the door. When does he discover her? Vayokom Adonai baboker. And he got up in the morning. Excuse me? Did I hear that right?
But he slept all night.
He slept fine. He left this poor woman out for a night of ghastly torture. And he slept. And clearly he slept with the door locked because she couldn't get back in when the poor broken thing crept up at the end of the night. So he gets up. Vayiftach dalsos habayis. He unlocks the house. Vayetze. Where does he come? Does he go out? After Vayetze, what are you expecting? He goes out to what? Don't cheat. What is he going to go out to do? He gets up in the morning, it's quiet, he opens the door. All right, so what's he going to do?
Bring her in.
He's going to go out to look for her, bring her in, do something. No, he gets up. Lalechas ledarko. He's going home. He doesn't even know where she is. V'hinei ha'isha pilagsho nofelas pesach habayis. He basically trips over her. Wait till you see the character transformation about how he will appear in the story that he publishes. Yodeho al hasaf, and her hands still on the doorpost. Vayomer elo kumi nibenelcha. He says to her, "Get up, we'll go now." There ain't no net. And there is no answer. Vayikochel al achamor vayokom ha'ish vayelech limkom. He throws her. There's no answer because she's dead, and he throws her across his donkey and goes on to his place. Vayavo al el beiso. He comes to his house, and what does he do? Vayikach es hamacheles Vayechazek b'Pilegesh. He takes the knife and he takes a hold. He grabs her like it's an abattoir, like a piece of meat.
That's right.
He takes her, he grabs, and they're still calling her Pilegesh, his Pilegesh. He takes her I can't even remember. And he cuts her into her bones, lishnei masar nisachim, into 12 parts. Vayishlechel b'chol givul Yisrael. And this he could do. He could go to the post office and send out, registered mail return receipt requested with these bloody human parts. Hashem Yirachim. Hayakol haro'eh ve'amar lo niyasov lo niyasa kazos l'miyom alos Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim ad hayom hazeh. And they took a look and they said, such a thing has never happened. This is unexampled, but one second, I have to read you from a little further passage which I didn't print for you, because he tells the story. He is the one who is going it. Now that he has created this shock, right? Shock and awe, sending out this poor woman's remains. I'll tell you, the combination of not great light and no glasses is really not easy. And he says to all these characters, yeah. Well, that's okay. This causes such a furor that 400,000 troops from the other tribes gathered together. In other words, there is an instant mob reaction. This one incident, and every 11 tribes are sending troops. Vayan ha'ish halevi ish ha'isha hanir tzacha vayomar. And the man, the Levite, now he talks about ish ha'isha, the husband of the woman who was murdered. Was she murdered? Not exactly. Vayomar, and he says, Hagiv osa asher levin yamin basi ani ufilag shilalun. My Pilegesh and I came there to spend the night. Vayakumu alai bale hagiva, and they attacked me. Vayasovu alai es habayis laila osi dimu laharog, and they threatened to kill me. Es pilagshi inu vatonos. And they settled for raping my Pilegesh, and she died. Notice what he's done here. He has made himself the center of the drama. I was in such danger. Oi, was I in danger. They were going to kill me. And instead, so they raped her, and she died. She is not anat cheo ashal cheo b'chol sidei nachlas Yisrael ki asu zimo unevola b'Yisrael. And I sent her around because they have done that which is lewd and unspeakable in Israel. Basically, that is going to be the last we hear of him in the story. He has created an impression which completely exonerates him from the part that he played in this and from the way he treated this woman. All of a sudden he cares about her. All of a sudden her outrage is a national problem. And what is interesting, because I purposely didn't print the rest, I will summarize it for you. Because, you see, the story of Pilegesh B'Givah is notable because there are no good guys. And that's the Ramban's key point, because what's going to happen? So the 11 tribes, if you notice, they come before they even hear from him. They get this bloody package, and all of a sudden, they are the vigilantes for justice. This is terrible. How is it terrible? Well, for one thing, what story are they operating? There are two biblical passages which are going to be important in this. One we already mentioned. As far as they are concerned, this is Sodom Redux. That we have a tribe in Israel that is behaving just like that story that we know from Chumash. And one of the things that's interesting to do in Tanakh is to recognize that the people who are living this story have read the same stories you have that came before. So they have made the absolute equation between Sodom and Givah, which of course touches off the most extreme emotions, the most extraordinary revulsion. But they're not, remember, we're the only ones who have access to what really happened in Givah. We're the only ones who have access to the nuanced differences between what happened with Lot and what happened in this story. The Levi has sent this out purposely, without actually saying one word which isn't true. He creates an impression which in their mind elides the two stories with no nuance. Their reaction is this terrible rage, and they're ready to shed blood. They arrive 400,000 strong. What is missing here? There is absolutely no judicial process, and there's no... Before Jews in ancient times went to war, they would consult the Urim V'Tumim. They would go and ask, where is God in this war? But you see, they didn't have to ask God. You know why? Because they were 11 to 1. Because they were 11 tribes against one tribe. And so they could give full rein to all of their emotional excitement, to all of their old grudges against the tribe of Benjamin for whatever reason. And the tribe of Benjamin, in their reaction, they're also not good guys. Because the tribe of Benjamin is so outraged that someone else is coming to mix into their business that they refuse to discipline the people of Givah at all. In other words, in the end, all of Shevet Binyamin is sucked into this problem. And the Shevet Binyamin also doesn't consult God. Shevet Binyamin doesn't pursue an internal examination of conscience. No. They're just outraged at process. How dare you? Three most dangerous words in the world. They don't want to talk about what happened. They want to talk about the process. How dare you come and threaten one of our cities? They're not yours, they're ours. And they also have reliance on the fact that if you read carefully, if you go home and check the rest, that they had some very skilled archers. And so this whole war, this is like a bad electrocution. It is just like, the whole thing is a mess because the tribe of Benjamin wins the first 2 rounds. This hugely confident group is repulsed twice and suffers tremendous casualties at the hand of this one plucky little tribe. Only then, when they actually are losing, does it occur to them to go and ask God. That's when God re-enters the story. God re-enters the story there And they finally have to start to fast and pray and get permission. It takes them 2 more tries before the tribe of Benjamin can finally be crushed. But then something very interesting happens. In the rush of this moment, they treat the tribe of Benjamin just like the city of Jericho. They basically declare a cherem. No one can ever marry into this tribe. And they killed so many people. When the dust cleared and cooler minds prevailed, they realized these aren't monsters. These are our brothers. We have just set the stage for the extinction of a tribe in Israel. And they have a problem because they have taken such extreme positions, they don't even know how to get themselves out of it anymore. So the first patent is, let's look for someone who wasn't loyal. So they find one group who didn't come when they called the army, and so they kill all of their men, and then their women are available to marry the people of Benjamin. Unfortunately, there wasn't big enough group. There was still a whole lot of Benjamite bachelors who didn't have anybody to marry. And so they invented what would later become Tu B'Av, Sadie Hawkins Day. And they said, well, we said we wouldn't give our daughters to them, but they could take our daughters. So the young girls who came to dance at the celebration in Shiloh, they gave permission, told them they wink wink to the Benjaminites, just grab them and make them your wives. And one of the Shittos in the Gemara that says why we celebrate Tu B'Av, it is the time when the Benjaminites were allowed again to come and marry within the Jewish people. However, insofar as this represents our conclusion of the book of Judges, what we see is a terrible story. We see the story of an abusive husband. We see the story of a town which has lost its moral compass and which doesn't recognize another Israelite as someone deserving of protection and hospitality. We see the Jewish people themselves, the people who slept through the chapters of Pesach Micha, but yet so filled with some inchoate rage that they're only too delighted to jump into the frenzy and to determine that the problems of Israel are all this one little town in Givah and anyone who would defend them. Which is an interesting parallel to certain trends in social media. All of a sudden, everything seems, there's this unanimity of outrage and violence. And then there is the terrible clearing of the air. That when the tribe of Benjamin has lost its compass because it only wants to defend its right, its absolute right in its territory, no matter what goes on there, and the other tribes are moved by this insane rage, only after everything is cleared do they ask themselves, what have we come to? And what we have really come to is the place where that opening phrase, Melech ein b'Yisrael, there is no king yet in Israel, becomes an emergency. And that sets the stage for the whole career of Shmuel as he searches for Israel's first king and gets it wrong with Shaul, until he finally will settle upon David Melech Yisrael, who will establish a new paradigm. And a Jewish king doesn't just mean the strongest guy in the kingdom. A Jewish king means someone who will always know that the question, what would God have us do, must be part of Jewish destiny. Because without it, we have the same instincts to become animals as any other people. And so, at some point, as things move forward, there will be a king in Israel. And when there is a king in Israel, events like Pilegesh B'Givah cannot happen. Thank you all so much for sitting through Judges with me. It's been an honor.
Rabbi,
Yes.
he was never held accountable